You call yourself lazy like it's a verdict. The task you keep sliding to tomorrow, the shortcut you took instead of the thorough job, the afternoon you spent doing nothing while a problem sat unsolved. You read all of that as evidence of a flaw. But the same brain you're blaming runs on a strict energy budget, and almost everything you label laziness is that budget doing exactly what it evolved to do. Your brain is roughly 2% of your body weight. It burns about 20% of your energy at rest. That ratio has held up across decades of measurement, from Atwell and Laughlin's energy budget in the Journal of Cerebral Blood Flow and Metabolism in 2001, to the University of Rochester, to a Quanta magazine analysis in 2026. Convert it to power, and the adult brain runs on around 12 watts, about a fifth of a standard 60-watt light bulb. In infants, the figure is closer to 50% of the body's energy. So you are carrying an organ that is small, constantly hungry, and never allowed to switch off. Evolution does not build a machine that expensive and then let it spend freely. It builds in a governor. That governor is the thing you keep mistaking for a character defect. Start with the oldest version of it. In 1943, the psychologist Clark Hull described what he called the law of less work, the tendency of humans and animals to take the least demanding route to a goal. When psychology turned toward the mind, that principle came with it, and it now has a name: the law of least mental effort. In 2019, Edward Patzelt, Wouter Kuhl, Alexander Milner, and Samuel Gershman at Harvard tested it across a sample of 811 people published in scientific reports. They used a task that lets people freely pick between two options, one demanding more mental work than the other. People reliably chose the easier one. Not the lazy people. People. There's a reason this isn't simple avoidance. Effort changes how your brain prices a reward. Researchers call it effort discounting, and the finding is consistent. The same payoff feels worth less when you have to work harder to get it. Your brain is doing constant cost-benefit math, and effort sits permanently on the cost side of the ledger. When you feel reluctance before a hard task, that's not weakness leaking through. That's an estimate. Your brain has run the numbers and flagged the price. This is where the reframe starts to earn its keep, because that same instinct, pointed correctly, is one of the most useful things your mind does. In 1984, Susan Fiske and Shelley Taylor introduced a phrase in their book, Social Cognition, that captures it perfectly: the cognitive miser. The idea is that your mind hoards mental energy the way a miser hoards money, defaulting to shortcuts and rules of thumb instead of analyzing every situation from scratch. They put it plainly. People are limited in their capacity to process information, so they take shortcuts whenever they can. Picture what life would be like without that miser. You'd recalculate the entire physics of a red light every time you approached an intersection. You'd weigh every brand of toothpaste like a dissertation. You would be exhausted by noon, and you would have accomplished nothing because you'd have spent your whole budget on decisions that never deserved it. The miser is why you don't. It frees the expensive machinery for the few problems that actually need it. Fiske and Taylor later refined the picture into what they called the motivated tactician, a thinker who switches between fast, effortless processing and slow, careful reasoning depending on what the moment is worth. That switch is the skill. Laziness, used well, is knowing when not to flip it. The economist Herbert Simon built an entire framework on this and won a Nobel Prize for it in 1978. Simon argued that real minds don't optimize because optimizing would mean evaluating every possible option, and no one has the time, information, or capacity for that. Instead, people satisfice, a word he coined in 1956 by fusing satisfy and suffice. You set a threshold for good enough, and you take the first option that clears it. Translation of the usual advice to consider all your options carefully. You can't, and trying is often the wrong move. The person who picks a good enough restaurant in 30 seconds and the person who agonizes for 20 minutes usually eat an equally good dinner. One of them spent 20 extra minutes of a finite mind on a question that didn't repay it. Satisficing isn't cutting corners. On most decisions, it's the rational answer. And your supposedly lazy instinct to just pick one is doing it for you. Now take the part that looks most like laziness from the outside. Stepping away. Leaving a problem unsolved and going for a walk. There's a name for what happens next, and it's one of the more reliable findings in creativity research. It's called incubation. Reviews of more than 100 experiments show that people solve problems better after they leave them alone for a while than when they grind straight through. And here is the detail that should change how you think about a wasted afternoon. The kind of break matters. In work led by Benjamin Baird, people who did an undemanding task during the break, something easy enough to let the mind drift, improved more on creative problems than people who did a hard task, rested completely, or took no break at all. The easy task induced more mind-wandering without making people consciously chew on the problem. A pre-registered study in Scientific Reports in 2025 found the same shape. Mind-wandering during a creative break predicted better performance, while deliberately, consciously thinking about the problem did not. The mechanism is the part you've been underrating. When you disengage, a set of brain regions called the default mode network stays active. It runs during rest and mind-wandering rather than focused work, and it's tied to memory, self-reflection, and the loose association of ideas. Estimates suggest something like 80 to 90% of the brain's energy goes to this ongoing background activity, not to the tasks you think of as thinking. A brain working hard on a task uses only about 5% more energy than a resting one, according to the analysis reported in Quanta. So, when you sit there doing nothing and a solution arrives unbidden, you weren't doing nothing. The expensive organ kept running. You just stopped getting in its way. This reframes the guilt you feel about rest, and the biology goes further than the mind. The evolutionary anthropologist Herman Pontzer and his colleagues studied the Hadza, a hunter-gatherer group in Tanzania who walk and forage far more than anyone in an office. Published in PLOS 1 in 2012, their finding upended a basic assumption. After correcting for body size, the Hadza burn about the same total energy per day as sedentary people in industrialized countries. The body doesn't simply spend more when you move more. It adapts, holding total daily energy within a narrow band, spending less elsewhere to compensate. And in a 2020 study in PNAS, the same researchers found the Hadza spend nearly 10 hours a day at rest, much of it squatting in postures that keep the muscles lightly engaged. Substantial inactivity isn't a modern vice. It's written into how humans have always lived. None of this means doing nothing makes you brilliant, and the honest version of this idea refuses that shortcut. Incubation works best after you've already struggled with a problem, not instead of struggling. Satisficing is the right tool for low-stakes decisions and a poor one for the choices that define a life. Pontzer's energy model is influential but genuinely debated. And persistent, heavy low motivation or exhaustion is not the same as the everyday effort conserving you're built to do. If that's where you are, that's a conversation for a qualified professional, not a reframe. The miser is a feature, but a feature can be misapplied. What changes is the verdict. The reluctance, the shortcut, the walk away from the desk, the good enough choice you made in seconds. You've been reading those as proof that something's wrong with you. They're the operating signature of a brain that costs more to run than almost any organ you own and has spent millions of years learning not to waste itself. The skill was never grinding harder against that instinct. It's aiming it. Spend the cheap automatic mode on everything that doesn't matter, so the expensive mode is still there for the few things that do. Step away from the wall on purpose and let the network that never stops keep working while you rest. The task you keep moving to tomorrow isn't evidence that you're lazy. It might be your brain telling you the price isn't worth it yet. The question worth sitting with is simple. Are you actually lazy, or have you just never been taught what your brain was doing the whole time?